It's snowing in Jacksonville. You to a more intimate. So, I'm out of the Marine Corps. I served for just shy of 5 years. Now, things have kind of gone sideways. Um, the next step for me is to, luckily, I'm fortunate enough to do this. It's to spend a year in sabbatical and work on the damn game. Without further ado or fanfare, it's it's time to lock in. So before I go into anything else, now I'm gonna have my face here on these, and I have my little bit of a better mic. Not that I'm talking into it, so it probably sounds bad in a different way. But I've prepared a somewhat lengthy lore video to give you guys the idea of the setting, which I'll be sharing shortly. But I wanted to go over sort of the things that I've been working on in the game in brief. I've taken about a month off at the back end of ending my active duty service, and I am now sort of back in the studio. You may have seen, you will have seen that my house is empty. I move out in 3 days, and I have to do some house repairs here, but I'm trying to get this video out before any of that. So, what I've been working on. A lot of the things that I've been working on right now have been on the back end. Most of the weapons are fully implemented. And most of the settings, they're kind of wonky right now, so forgive it. I'll throw it up on the screen, but forgive the menu. This is very work in progress, and a lot of these things are changing, or I do plan to change them and flesh them out. One of the big things that came about in the previous days while I was working on these systems, so all of the weapon swapping works 100%. I guess kind of the nexus of everything that I've been doing recently with the game is sort of a switch from, it's sort of a paradigm shift. The pressure cooker of having to get all this done in the space of time of a year kind of gave me a chance to look at the scope of the game and to change some major elements of the story. Luckily, right before the lore video, because I would have had to renege on a lot of the things that were maybe kind of more lengthy about the story. But luckily, I have not, since I've been lazy. So I've been looking at the basilisk for a really long time. It was always meant to be sort of, I think, in the working document, I had it as like the fourth or fifth aircraft that you unlock. But this doesn't make any sense because the Basilisk is the premier aircraft on the Helio side of the conflict that sort of gets behind the idea of the game, which is this third-person shooter, but you happen to be in an aircraft. So the premier part of that role is that the Basilisk is a VTOL system. And it's on the thumbnail for the video, but the design kind of got away from me. When I was making the original 3D model, I accidentally made the body bigger than I intended, and I kind of just stuck with it. And for a long time, it sort of bothered me. And there was always this like complexity, this over-engineering to the design. And so it's like this Gucci aircraft. So it's a rare aircraft that you see. So I've had to go back because I intend, since this is the aircraft that the player that probably best represents the idea of the third person aircraft game. I had to go back and rewrite a lot of things in the story, not the lore per se, to make sure that this was the first aircraft that the player got their hands on. And that required a significant retooling of the flight system, more like a significant tweaking of the flight system, primarily the introduction of the VTOL system. So the ability to stop, hover, strafe, go up and down, and wherever you point your cursor, shoot at the enemies. But this introduced something very interesting, which was the fact that it made it so there was this kind of disparity between inverted flight and inverted controls and shooting. I noticed right away because I like shooting non-inverted. I like flying inverted, which is something that later on I will have to go in and change the settings for, which these are minor tweaks to talk about, but like kind of a lot of the code base has to get tinkered with to bring these to light. So I will probably make settings in the future for VTOL mode to have a separate inversion setting, but currently that's not in the game. It made me realize I need to just have it default to non-inverted flight, so that if this is going to be the premier aircraft, the one that you start with, and hopefully the one that I would like the players to use the most, then I need it to control appropriately. So swapping the control scheme in that way actually broke my AI. There were a number of reasons of breaking my AI. A number of reasons that my AI broke. Primarily switching to or throwing a copy. I have to come up with a better method to do this. Throwing a copy of the game onto my USB and then errantly like erasing some code that I thought was erroneous. It turned out it was like the thing that was making the AI work. Figure that. The other thing, like I was talking about, was the pitch controls. Inverting them made the AI completely forget how to fly the aircraft. It was trying to go away from the splines. Like they follow a spline path. And so it just made the behavior erratic. There was a lot of troubleshooting to try to figure out how to get the AI back to functioning, which I did last night. It was a lot of work, kind of annoying, but they're back and they're like an actual enemy again. Yeah. So all of this kind of spun out from the initial idea of I need this VTOL system, and which is good. The other thing that it revealed, and probably the final thing I'll talk about here, is the fact that the ground guidance system. So there's a flight control system, FCS in lore, a flight circuit soul. This is the machine entity, sort of Warhammer-esque, the machine spirit sort of thing, that helps the pilot with minute controls so that the pilot can focus on fighting the enemy. And before it would level out, before the player hit the ground. And I'm doing it bad here because I don't have any footage of it leveling out, but you're going to have to believe me when I say, well, I do have some footage actually. There were two things about this. It leveled out so the player didn't collide with the ground, which was good because it's a little more player friendly. You don't like nosedive into the ground nearly as often. But I was already intending, if you remember from the first part of my initial video, to kind of do a banshee control where you scrape the ground and you keep going anyway. So this kind of fought that design decision in a weird way. And it was all really what the flight control system, the auto leveling out, was to promote this one camera angle for when you're close to the ground, because you then can't see what you're doing because the camera is so high above the aircraft that you can't tell where the nose is going. So you're going to hit the ground. And the ultimate intent is like if the aircraft touches the water at any point, it immediately gets destroyed. You can't recover these aircraft from the water is kind of the in-lore reasoning, but it just doesn't look natural for an aircraft to scrape against water, right? So there has to be something there. So I wanted to provide for the player a better method of knowing where they were going. And so it was like, okay, like I'm taking out the auto leveling. If I take out the auto leveling, I can't have this camera angle, so I have to switch it. So camera's here above the plane. Now it's here below the plane. And almost immediately, it's like, this took like, this was all of a 2-minute decision, just test and look. And it almost immediately provided a better visual result. Like immediately, the player feels like they're in more control. They're closer to the ground, so they have a better sense for how far from the ground they are. And then they're in the dust cloud or the water spray that's like getting kicked up, and you can see the plane's contrails, and you're very far behind the plane, which is sort of how the boost looked in previous builds of the game. But now, like you get that same sense, but when you're on the ground. And so it's like, I guess it's really interesting because if you were like strafing targets and you're in the Basilisk specifically, which has a canted gun down when it's in flight mode, like I think it's going to be really easy for players to kind of engage with those ground targets in ways that like in Ace Combat, it was kind of annoying. I think Project Wingman did a really good job, but just to be egoist for a minute, I think I'm doing it better. And I think you're probably going to spend a lot of time against ground targets and flying in canyons and things like this. So this sort of perspective is going to really I'm yapping. I'm fucking yapping. But yeah, a lot of things came from this one decision. So those are the major things, major changes from the game. I'm gonna have like a video showcase that shows everything here as I cut these clips together. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you appreciate the progress. It's been very small. I have not worked on the game a lot since the last devlog in real human hours, because I had a day job. So please forgive me that for it being small. And the lore video is going to be pretty light on visuals, but hopefully I provide enough there that you don't fall asleep during it.
They were always there, the boundaries that divided us. I think it's time we tested them. Settle down and listen, for I am now about to recount the history of Celestia. This is the prelude to Helio Stratos, the song that erases perceived boundaries and dances on the prayers of the common folk. Helios was a great empire. She sat in the shade of Elu, the bioluminescent tree, which shielded the people from the mana radiation, a blanket of dancing light, and aposematism on the land. The empire was formed of 3 peoples: humans, ibex, and lynx. Humans had short round ears, ibex short nubby horns, and lynx ears similar to a house cat's, as these features would not be enough to subsume ambient radiation levels. All of these are considered an exceptionally rare and hazardous birth defect today. However, in the shade of Elu, a generation before now, these were the norm. Today, the peoples have pointed ears, long curved horns, and stiff tall ears, respectively, as if the new generations are echoes of the great sages that these features were once unique to. The sages were the first to mutate, growing long ears which glowed at their ends with bioluminescence. A result of mana consumption and radiation exposure, it is believed this mutation is the means for the body to filter or purge the radiation. The sages would venture out beyond the shade of Elu and chart the land. As practitioners of magic, they would return with knowledge. One such thing they learned was an ancient inscribing method known as sigils that tapped into ambient mana radiation to form bonds. The sages led the tribal oclastic faith, which learned how to extract magics from the earth and water by tending plants and making mana potions from their crushed leaves. The sages with mana as their fuel performed miracles. At the time, primitive flying machines and ground vessels with weak protections against mana radiation would go where directed by the sages, not far from the shade of Elu, to procure whatever supplies and regions were demanded for their work, or at the whim of the emperor. Then, as disastrous as it was peculiar, a meteor fell from the sky. It traveled nearly parallel down the length of the stem of Elu, shattering the great tree to powdery debris, leaving only its ovary intact. a petrified moon, now known as Stratos, to float in geosynchronous orbit above its own roots. The Emperor was dead. A tear left in the sky above Eos, the Emperor's seat of power. Debris held suspended in the strange resultant gravitational anomaly, like the city was holding its breath. 3 stone maidens emerged from the meteor, which shimmered and burned with prismatic flames. The maidens' bodies were somewhat skeletal, or piecemeal, with openings where jets of flames burst out from under their skin. They stood twice the height of any normal person. They did not remark on the destruction they had wrought. They simply made a promise. Learn our teachings and prosper. They quietly went to work as the speaker maiden, Rashka, explained their mission and how humanity could benefit from aiding them with it. Not to be swayed by the words of these destructive strangers, the sages led their most loyal far afield as nomadic peoples. They would search for new safe havens, whilst the people who stayed dug pits and trenches into the earth along the roots of Elu. They made it into a great hearth, the bosom of the budding Helios theocracy. The first of the fortress reliquary, great, holy, and industrious cities bound by a singular purpose to advance technology. The Helios theocracy thrived and spread across the planet and into the heavens. Those primitive vehicles advanced exponentially, becoming thinking machines of immense capabilities. Reluctantly, in exchange for materials and a share of the vehicles, the sages developed means to use sigils to confer with the thinking machines. The theocracy built a great space elevator known as Astraeus Vault. They also constructed 3 heavenly bodies, habitat units each named for a stone maiden, where they began to construct strange communication relays that no one could fathom but the maidens themselves. The strange harmonies of the relays refined mana radiation, and life within them experienced explosive growth and regeneration. In time, the stone maidens stopped burning and ceased all motion or signs of life. The planet suffered vast desertification and rising water levels over the years. The sages, reluctantly again, joined to the theocracy, under the promise that those families of the Oclastic faith be raised to the status of nobility, as dukes or lesser barons of higher status than the common workers, so long as they abandoned their ancient faith, effectively filling the power void left by the once ruling stone maidens. The nobility believed it was the fashion of industry that was killing the planet, and devised a scheme to return it to its former glory. They turned the heavenly habitats into arboretums in order to revive dwindling populations of flora and fauna from the surface, all the while harboring resentment for the common people, who had followed the stone promise for so many years, the very thing that still choked the planet from within an inch of its life. The nobility enacted sharp reforms and began to slowly starve the commoners. A group of high-status ministers from the stone promissory of the Helios theocracy formed a grievance committee and took their formal complaint to the nobility. The nobility, taking every opportunity to be cruel to commoners, refused the demands of the committee. However, the committee brought to light, through an inquisitor's investigation, that there was a deep-rooted heresy within the nobility in the continued practices of the Oclastic faith, a faith which condemned the stone promise. The committee sought to expunge this iconoclasm from the society. In response, the nobility dispensed with their guise and declared themselves secessionists from the theocracy as the new Lunatos nation. They claim it as their faith, and if not that, they prosper too greatly from this industry to stop its fires and the benefits it offers them.
So, what does Heliostratos mean? Translated in Latin, Helios is sun, and Stratos is layer. For the game's sake, layer refers to the stratosphere, or the space where the sky meets space. It's like the Earth's Kármán line, but on Celestia, the planet where the game takes place, it's much closer to the planet's surface. And it's where the heaviest concentration of mana radiation collects. The Heliostratos is a belief held by common folks, regardless of faith, that a republic will form, free of the tyranny of the theocracy, where organized religion has caused damage to the world, and how the theocracy itself has driven the different populaces apart. It is believed that this republic will allow people to no longer be defined by faith or class, and that a person born in it would no longer have their destiny ruled by their blood, but instead decided by their merit.
Lunitas is winning the war. Our protagonists find themselves at the right place at the right time, gaining an opportunity to change the course of history.
Okay, hopefully you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe. It helps out a lot. The more views I can get on these videos, the more people I can get the eyes on the game. Hopefully, if you have a friend who enjoys this sort of game, or a friend who's into shooters at all, I think I'm going to provide them with a fun experience. So if you wouldn't mind sharing, that would be appreciated as well. Anyway, I'm Tovok. And for Amalgam, that's all the updates I have this time. Thanks for joining us, and I hope to see you in the next video.